Actually, I was building the very first databases when I was a mainframe programmer, like Columbia House, BMG, New York Times. We would take thousands of tapes that would come from mom and pop shops, and we would build these databases. And so, essentially we were bootstrapping databases, right? Before anybody knew what a database was. So I would, log the tape in, normalize, standardize, merge, purge, all this stuff to create these databases. And we would hand them over to like a New York Times, and they would say, here's $10 million for this database, right? I want to help you solve a problem. I want to make your day better. And I want to share what I've learned, right? I didn't spend all this time going to school, getting 18 certifications to not use it for the good of other people.
Assemble the council.
On today's episode of the Cybersecurity Council podcast, Cybersecurity with Attitude, let's welcome Cassandra Mack. We serve cyber leaders.
Cass, I'd like to start with an award. It's always good to start with an award. Alumni Achievement Award from the Keller Graduate School of Management of DeVry University. You are a recognized alum. Tell us about receiving that award, what it meant to you, how you earned it. Go ahead and brag.
I cried, first of all, because my path to college was not what people normally experience. Like, I grew up in a fundamentalist society where women just didn't do that. It was expected that you were going to learn how to be a good wife and a good mom and bake bread and, all that stuff. And my parents really thought I would, at the most, I'd maybe put on a pair of pants and go work in the factory or the field or something like that. So escaping Idaho and going there, my mom literally thought in Chicago I was going to get, murdered. So she called out an all-out escort to take me to school. So, all that aside, it took me a long time to get through it. I went to computer information systems as my major, and I had never touched a computer before. And they kind of scoffed at me at the registration table because they thought that I was a lunatic. And, they're like, oh, this chick from Idaho, she thinks she knows what she's getting herself into, right? But I used my smarts that I got somehow and figured out how to buddy up with people who were really good at programming. And I helped them write their papers, and they helped me pass my labs, and I got through it. So, just being recognized at the end of all that for, doing something with that education that was hard fought for me was really emotional. And I actually went back, a couple years ago and got my master's in cybersecurity, which if someone told me even, 20, 30 years ago that I was going to be in cybersecurity, I would have said that they were crazy because I could barely make it through my C# programming class. And my professor was like, I don't think you're cut out for this. I was like, dude, you don't understand. I cannot go back and sleep on my mom's couch. That is not an option. And he had that, kind of raised eyebrow the whole entire time I was in that class. And I think I barely scraped by with a D, but I made it, right? I made it. It was a required class and I got through it. And did I ever use that? No. Right. So was it a big deal? Probably not. But all in, I think it was an excellent experience. So for all the negative people talk about DeVry, I have no idea what they're talking about. Like, they delivered on every promise they ever made to me. They told me, if you make it 3 semesters in, we will walk you into a job. And they did that. They walked me into an apprenticeship, which set my entire career off, set me in the right path. And they've delivered ever since then, right? Every time I've gone back, I got more. I've changed my career 7 times. And every time they were at the crux of that. And so great experience through and through. And I was very, very delighted to win an award. That was really cool.
I like every part of your story and the intersection with DeVry. They found you, you found them, award achieved. That's fantastic.
What's crazy? People don't realize, like, back when I graduated high school, it was 93, they had commercials for DeVry, and they would send somebody to your house to do a pitch to your parents. And so I had to have somebody come and sign off, and my mom had no idea they were coming. Like, I had dropped out of school, got a GED fraudulently because I had to get out of this podunk town, right? Desperation. And my mom was just like, she thought I had lost my mind. So I can still to this day see her face imprinted in my brain. And I look back and I'm like, actually, I did that, right? Like, I got over my mom's objections, first of all, right? Because, talking your mom into something she doesn't want to be talked into, really hard to do, right?
Out of 300,000 alumni, 4 people were chosen for this award in this last year. you are one of them. Very good job. Thank you.
Felt special.
You have made the move all the way over to CEO founder independent consulting, T&T Consulting. What inspired you to get there?
It was kind of accidental at first. I was working as a consultant for my good friend Dasha Deckworth, who is with Stealth ISS. She was essentially my mentor that brought me over from program management to cyber. She was like, "You're better than that. Come over here." And I didn't believe her at first. She gave me a CISSP book and I cracked it open, a couple days a week for 5 years before I finally got on the train. She said, "Hey, I have a consulting job for you. It's at Atos. We have a ton of problems to solve. Come over here. They're going to love you." And that's exactly what happened, right? Every 3 months, they would switch me to a new contract. And 3 years later, I had worked on 5 or 6 different things. And I realized, oh, I'm doing independent consulting now. And I have, money coming in without even having to think about it. This is really easy. Why don't I just take what I've learned here and start doing it over and over again for other people? And then I found, oh, there's 6-month contracts out there for this, so it kind of was what other people do with like a W-2 contract. Instead of that, I just was like, oh, I could do a 1099, and you just have to look for the ones that will let you do it. But I think the real trick is when you realize, oh, I need to go find people to help me build this business because I can't be the one doing all the time, because we don't sell businesses that are built off of our back. We sell businesses that have a running machine that works well and is generating capital, and we're able to kind of oversee and be the sales lead. So that took me a minute to figure that part out, because I was just, doing the Hebrew slave labor work all the time, working 88 hours a week. That was like the Atos days. And then I finally realized, like, oh, this is not scalable. You cannot, there's no more hours for you. You can't do this anymore. So I think, it was an accidental trip into it. But then I realized, yeah, kind of like not working for the man all the time. I want to be the man, right? I want to be the man in charge of my own stuff. And so ever since then, I've been at home, and I do occasionally take regular working for the man work just for the, you've got to keep up on your experience, right? If you're only doing consulting, you're not in the thick of the day-to-day stuff of a CISO. And so I don't want to get too far away from it, because my ultimate fear, biggest fear ever, is I don't want to become obsolete. I never want someone to look at me and be like, yeah, she doesn't really know how to do anything. Like, that gives me the absolute heebie-jeebies, and I want no part of it. So I know I go a little tangential there, but all this stuff is near and dear to my heart.
Can you describe the overall vision and mission for T&T Consulting?
It's actually a good time that you're asking me this, because I just changed my mind for this year. I was just kind of content in the last couple of years with the way the economy has been, to just let it kind of ebb and flow the way that it did. And now I'm really concerned about, I'm getting good salespeople. I'm going to sell pretty much anything that anybody could want, because now I know enough people that could deliver these services. Whereas before it was more like, oh, I know mostly GRC, or I know mostly, building from the beginning, or I know chaos wrangling, whatever it was that I was kind of honing in on at that time. What I'm noticing is there's just a general need for, hey, I'm not really even sure what my problem is. I just know that stuff is not working, and I need somebody to come and help me figure it out. And that seems to be more my wheelhouse. And also just figuring out, okay, what subject matter experts do I want to be in my circle of trust to work with me? Because I think when you're scaling your business, that's the hardest thing, right? How do I, let go of not trusting people, and how do I raise up people and grow my own so that they are doing the things that I want done the way that I want them done, versus just hiring random consultants out there that, you don't really know what's their work product like on a consistent basis. So my vision at this point is really just getting myself into the habit of trusting the people that I've brought into the fold and trying to help them scale up and do better, because honestly, there's not much else that I need in life, right? I'm making money. I know how to make money. I have my kids that I worked 10 years to have. I want to kind of just enjoy life and do stuff. And I also want to help other people level up. So for me, that's a really big focus, is like bringing my trusted people who are really low level people that I met at master school, and I was teaching there for free, by the way. Finally getting paid from that 2 years later, but that's another story. But anyway, I met these amazing Latinas there who were transitioning from other careers. One was a cosmetologist, and one was 100% PTSD from the military. They are the biggest shining stars I have ever met in security. And it's because they're motivated and driven and they want to do more. So a lot of my focus now is like, how can I help them level up and achieve what they want to achieve? And also, how do I build a business with them? Because I feel like they're very deserving of it. And they wouldn't have gotten that help, I don't think, anywhere else. So it's really important to me to make sure I follow through with the things that I've told them I would do, which is I will help you in any way I can. And so that's where I'm at right now.
There's already a theme repeating as I've asked you about T&T Consulting and your vision and mission. You're going back to people, you're talking about services from the business side of it. All of that is fantastic. What are the core services of T&T Consulting? And if I asked you to differentiate from others in the market, what would you tell us?
I think my most redeeming quality is being able to walk into the fire and be able to sort out what's going on and figure out what's important and what's not. But it's more so helping the customer figure that out for themselves, because every place is different. Every flavor of fire is different. Every accelerant is different, right? Sometimes they have systemic problems that really need more help. And it's not just a matter of let's come and apply some technology, or let's come and do a policy, or, get you through your SOC 2. My specialty really is come in, look around, let it kind of just marinate for a minute and figure out, do you really even know what your issue is that you're trying to solve right now? Because I can come and just deliver you a bunch of stuff and take your money, but that's not really going to help you, because in 3 months, you're going to be right back where you were. And I think that comes from I had, 15 years of hands-on technology experience. I was doing mainframe programming, which isn't very relevant anymore, but all those same principles hold true, right? If your architecture is not good, if your documentation is not good, if your code's not good, all these problems have the same kind of recurring issues that will happen over time. And when you have tech debt spawns more problems in other areas of the business, unhappy business people, lots of things that you really have to go to the root of the problem to understand. And a lot of companies, they're just going so fast and they're still making money, but they don't realize hey, you have this giant gaping wound here that no one has looked at. Someone's thrown a blanket over the top of it instead of proper wound treatment, and you're basically just bleeding here. And sometimes I'll find multiple pockets of that. And they're sometimes even in small companies, right? You have an owner who's done a bunch of things and another owner who doesn't understand what they did, and they're just going along with it and they're not happy and they don't understand. And then someone will say, hey, this little tiny tweak right here, if you would just add this thing, right? Like an IT person instead of, a lawyer trying to do this stuff for you, could change your entire view. Or you just need a project manager, right? You're making billions of dollars, but you don't have a project manager, and your CEO and your CFO are fighting all the time, little things like that. So I call it chaos wrangling, but sometimes there's just no chaos to wrangle. And then we just go in and we do tactical deployment of whatever it is they want. Maybe it's a SOC 2. I need this in 2 months because I think we're going to get bought or we want to be IPO. Cool. We can do that. But I think it's more of the being open to helping with whatever it is and not being locked into, I don't really understand that part. I don't know how to do that. And that all it goes back to project management. If you learn how to be a project manager, you learn how to solve for everything, because those people don't report to you. They don't owe you anything. They don't necessarily agree with you. And you're ultimately responsible for the output that you promised someone. And so that's a skill I take with me everywhere. And it really helps to just be hey, what is it that you're trying to get to? If you can figure that out, you can solve pretty much any problem. It's just a matter of lining up the solutions to be able to make it play out the way that you think it's going to play out. And obviously, cost, time, and scope need to be measured to make sure that they're getting what they want. So usually when you speak in that language, they, their eyes perk up and, they get out their checkbook and they're happy to write it. And so then everybody's good.
Cass, it's been our intention to title this episode Cybersecurity with Attitude, and that's arriving for real right here with a comment about differentiators. CISO and CIO gigs. You are finding the contracts, you are getting these gigs, you are walking the line between security and tech. Tell us how you navigate the industry. What are some of the pieces of Cass magic that help you break down the barriers, shatter glass ceilings, get the contracts, and then be able to do what you are describing? Hey team, you hired me for this, but I'm seeing you have a gap over here. So you're doing a lot. Please share. Please offer some insights here.
Being willing to, when people can see that you're different from other people and that you're willing to do hard work and roll up your sleeves, or have the hard conversations in a nice way, right? Like, because some people are just very abrupt and it doesn't resonate well. And I used to be like that. I got told many times, because I was raised by a Marine Corps officer, I would be very direct and I would be told, you might want to temper that with a little mercy, because it's really hard to hear that. And so over time, I've been trying to like just kind of mimic other people who are good at storytelling, or, I learned like only a few years ago that the cadence of people in the ministry is a certain way to get people to listen, right? So learning how to speak in a cadence that that their brain can latch onto kind of helps with those conversations as well. But the biggest thing in technology is not talking down to people. You have to talk at the level that the people are at and figure out where they're at quickly before they tune out, because you only get a couple seconds before they're like, get this person out of here. They're not adding value to my day and I have 5 other things I need to do. Or, they'll flat out tell you, you got about 30 seconds. So honestly, most of my stuff comes from referrals. People that have already done some kind of project with me, or they know me, and someone will cross their path and say, hey, I'm trying to do this thing. And they'll say, oh, Cassandra does that. Let me send you over there and see if she can help you. I do get a lot also I try to keep in contact with local recruiters, because they tend to have companies who don't have a lot of money, but they have short-term projects and they want someone to do it, but they don't want to go through this whole interviewing and hiring process. They just want, give me somebody who's experienced, who can show me proof that they've already done this thing. There's a whole lot of that. Like maybe 30% of the business comes from referral and people just having a crisis that, someone points them to me. I'd say, another third probably comes from me actively seeking out projects to find something new and different that I want to do. And then another 30% is just continuous. I get Series B and Series C companies that are ready for SOC 2. So that's a really easy thing to do. And what we're really trying to do at this point is get it down to a science so that we can do it really quick, really cheap, and not take up a bunch of time on either side, so that you're basically looking like Santa Claus coming in and delivering them this nice shiny SOC 2 report. But they're like, how do they do that so fast, right? Or so cheap, whatever it is, right? It's really just getting down to the mechanization, is what I call it, of the process that we all know how to do and that nobody wants to do, right? Nobody wants to do SOC 2. Nobody wants to do PCI either, for that matter, right? But PCI is a little harder because there's a lot of must-haves instead of like nice-to-haves, or things that you could talk to your auditor about. I like to say SOC 2 is kind and gentle, right? You can have a meaningful dialogue with your auditor about something that you may or may not have. But in PCI, it's like, you don't have it, you don't have it. We're going to go ahead and write that finding for you now.
I'm very impressed with, off the cuff, you could say 30% of my business comes from referral, 30% comes from self-sourcing, 30% comes from SOC 2, often in the startup market. You know what you're doing. You know how to go and find business. You said one thing that tickled me a little bit. You said SOC 2 is easy. I would want to say SOC 2 is easier than ISO, but I would never want to say SOC 2 is easy. It takes the entire company to get a SOC 2 done.
You know what? I have a secret weapon there, and I don't tell everybody about this, but my secret is we come in basically like, I'm trying to think of like, what's the word to use, but I don't want to say like a savior, but like the way we do it, myself and my Latina crew that I am so proud of.
Yes.
Essentially, we'll come in and look around, right? Our forte is looking around and figuring out where the holes are. And instead of going to X business person or Y business person, we do add their name to it, but then we talk to them about it and say, hey, do you know anything about this? And if they're like, no, we're like, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. So we just do it. Whatever it is, we will create it. We will create the process, create the policy, whatever it is. We don't put it back on them because we know they either don't have the knowledge or they don't have the interest or the time, right? So if you're constantly waiting in that old fashioned way of like farming it out and waiting and having meetings, and you're just stuck in this forever loop of like opening JIRA tickets and waiting for someone to answer and nobody answers. And, you're basically taking their money to babysit, which that's not what we get hired for. We get hired to make things happen and get that report done. So I use SOC 2 as an example because it's the most kind and gentle of all the audits that I can think of. I would never tell people I'm just doing stuff for PCI, right? Or ISO. ISO, there are some things, right? If you're creating that huge matrix where you have to talk about how everybody, gets dressed and puts their shoes on and how they choose their shoes, it's like literally every single nook and cranny of a thing that you have to designate. I might do that for them because that's never going to get done by somebody in the business. But there are some things that have to be systemic, right? And proved as systemic that you couldn't fake your way through. But in that same token, you could come in and do the pre-assessment for ISO and be like, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create all this stuff, right? And in 3 months, you're going to do your external audit. And this stuff's going to be systemic by then because you're going to keep doing what I told you that you're supposed to do, or you're not going to pass, right? So those strong conversations have to be had early and often to make sure they get it, right? And you can't just act like you're not transferring data or storing data, right? That's in scope. You need to be aware that when the auditor asks you these questions, you need to have real answers for them because they're going to look at stuff and say, this doesn't match. So that's a lot of the conversations we have is just awareness, right? Because a lot of business people don't have awareness of like, what is the auditor going to ask? What are they going to look for? And it's an educational process, but you don't want to do too much because they're like, I didn't want to hire you to come and lecture me. I hired you to come just take care of it. So it's like riding the fine line between education and trying to help them help themselves, right? Stay out of your own way. Do these things. Here's your cheat sheet. We're going to go now.
I endorse everything you just said. I endorse every approach that you just described, the proactive, I'm just going to do it and get it done. I myself am doing a SOC 2 renewal right now. My organization needs like an AI ML data governance policy and some other AI guardrails and processes. Guess what? I generated them, published them. The stick is now in the ground. Move forward, everybody. These things can change over time. They are organic living documents, but I am not waiting for any team, any organization, or any person to agree with the policy. I'm using what I know to be best practices. I'm publishing that. We're all going to move forward. And it sounds like you do the same kind of thing.
The sad thing is those policies live in their own little isolated place and people don't even look at them until some problem comes up and they want to hold somebody's feet to the fire. And then it's like, the policy says, I don't know. Hoping one day we get to a point where we're all living in the real world where the policy can live and breathe like people do. And I don't know, maybe AI is going to help us with that. Maybe it becomes like a real-time thing where we're able to be proactively fed things from the policy and procedure versus having to go look for them, because it breaks down when someone has to go look for the thing or it's living in multiple places, which is pretty much everywhere now. Or when HR doesn't make people actually refer to the policy, they're like, I don't know. Do we have a policy about that? Right? That's where it breaks down and nothing ever gets done with it. Right? So half the time we write the policies, we'll get a business person that's like, this needs to match reality. And I'm like, that is a great idea. However, if we do this, your SOC 2 will not be done for 6 months, right? Because you guys don't even know what your real life is. So if we wait for real life to be known, your policy is not going to get done. So let's start here, and then you can come back and make it the flavor that you want it to be. You have a whole year to do that before the next one. And so a lot of times it's, I know you know this, like just trying to talk them down from decisions that are going to cost them time and money. But it's like counterintuitive, right? Yes, we want the policy to be followed. Yes, we want it to match real world. But when it comes down to getting things done, I don't really know if that always, it's not always, one before the other.
With T&T Consulting, do you package your fractional or virtual CISO or CIO services in a specific way? Or is it really engagement by engagement, kind of more of a line item type thing?
I started that way with a menu and I found that it overwhelms people and they try to fit themselves into a box that isn't necessary, because I'm kind of like, hey, what is your budget? Typically I would charge this, and I'm getting more into the retainer thing because at first I thought it was kind of abusive. It kind of felt like consulting where you're booking hours that you're not really doing anything. And I like to be a little bit more tangible. I don't like getting a bill and the person's like, oh, I spent 10 hours this month. And I'm like, what did you do? Right? I want to know, hey, I was engaged with you. I know what you were doing. It was a couple hours more or less, whatever. Cool. Or they come to me and say, hey, this project's taking more. It's going to be 10 to 20 hours more, whatever. at least you're kind of keeping a mental note of what's happening versus like if you just do this open-ended retainer thing, there's just something that doesn't sit right about that. Because we don't just hand people money and say, use it at will, right? I'm not going to tell you to do that with me either. So, and then the whole lawyer model of like billable hours against a retainer, I'm like, okay, if we're in crisis mode and you're calling me because you have a breach, I could see that, right? But most of the time you're not calling me. You're going to call somebody that is like a forensic examiner or whatever, if you're a big enough company, right? You may call me and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or, hey, do you have somebody who can help me dig through these files, which I can absolutely do for you. But I don't need to have a retainer to pick up the phone and answer a question from you. That should be something that just comes because we're trusted partners. I don't want to have to worry about you're going to charge me a per hour thing to pick up the phone. And I think that's what a lot of big companies do, right? I've worked in a lot of these places doing consulting and they charge an inordinate amount of money for things that I'm like, that takes 15 minutes. Like, you're really going to charge them $300,000 for a retainer for me to go do a 2-week assessment and pick up the phone when they call and maybe sit in on some calls to babysit their program manager who may or may not know what they're doing. Like, it doesn't sit well, I guess is the right way to say it, right? And some of it may go back to like just my, my working class upbringing of like, what are you getting for the money that you're paying? And what are the tangible things that you can see that are proof of the work that was done? So, I would rather go and attack a problem, right? Let's get to the problem of the business, not come in and look around and say, oh, you don't have this and that. We need to do that, right? It's not going to make sense to them when you're trying to give them this big, beautiful package of stuff that they've never heard of, that they don't know what it is. There's time for that later when you've educated them a little bit more. But I think our primary job is to come in and help them solve a problem. And usually it's like, hey, I have this thing that doesn't even fit in my wheelhouse, but they don't know where to find somebody, right? So if they need IT help, I can refer them to somebody that's qualified, reliable IT help, and they're going to remember, oh, Cassandra knew how to find that. Or, hey, I just need a pen test. I don't need anything else. Okay, cool. What's your budget? I can point you to a reliable pen testing service that will fit in your budget. What's your timeline, right? Like things are questions that need to be asked to help you make a good decision is a lot of what I end up doing. Sometimes I get paid for it and sometimes I don't, but people will remember that you did something for them without sticking your hand out in their face. And they will remember that later when they are looking for someone to help them. And then that time is probably going to be a time where you can charge some money for it. But I think, you kind of have to pay it forward before the universe is going to give it back to you in the form of money. And it's never done me wrong. Like my mom's preaching to me always as a child was, you smile at everyone you pass because you don't know if that's the only smile they're going to get in that day. And you also do the right thing for other people because it's the right thing to do. And you do it until you're not able to do it anymore. And so I just keep that in the back of my mind, right? Like I have enough money. We live a good life. My kids are going to private school. I don't need to be money grubbing and taking every dollar from people. It's more about the work, right? Like I want to do something interesting. I want to help you solve a problem. I want to make your day better. And I want to share what I've learned, right? I didn't spend all this time going to school, getting 18 certifications to not use it for the good of other people. And so, I don't know, I don't want to sound preachy or anything, but it's really important to me that we're not like seen as people who are taking, right? Like you got this great knowledge base and experience, but you're just taking from other people because they're vulnerable. It's just not the right thing to do. And it's one thing if you're dealing with a huge company that has deep pockets and throws money around, right? Like Atos was like that. They would be like, oh, here's a $400 an hour consultant. Here's another $350. Like they didn't care. They were cutting checks that were like $25,000 every 2 weeks for me to babysit a data center move. And I was happily taking the money. But at the same token, right, I also knew I was giving 88 hours a week of my life. My husband would bring my baby and put her under the table so I could see her while I was on phone calls because I was just nonstop. We're building databases in real time, moving Oracle RAC databases to OVM and ECM, which is basically going from the biggest, roughest, baddest Oracle database down to a tiny virtual machine that could be leveraged from anywhere versus like these huge, essentially racks that had to sit in a data center and, someone had to pay attention to how many giant government databases were sitting on these versus, oh, we have 100 now virtual machines over here that we can tell exactly what's on each one of them versus having to go and do a screen test and figure out what lives on this giant box that no one's ever touched, So I know I went tangential there, but it's really important to me that you treat the company that you're dealing with the right way for what you're dealing with. And I think, part of my strategy in growing T&T going forward is going to be obviously, selling to the right people, the right things, and being able to get to a point where I can trust a salesperson so that I don't have to do all the selling. But I think there's a huge opportunity out there in the market because people are still talking down to people. People are still not explaining things and making it this huge mysterious thing, security, right? But we have to get to a point where security is something that everyone can have because we're so far behind other countries that are nation state, backed by huge governments. We're basically bootstrapping security for everyone, right? And it starts with each of us individual people doing that. And if we don't do it, we're going to get further and further behind because we have to build up our mom and pop businesses because that's the root of all of our economy. If we don't do that, big companies aren't going to be successful either because they're built on the backs of these mom and pop shops. So I feel really strongly about just the whole premise of like not being a taker in this economy and giving as much as you can so that you can see the results of it. And hopefully I can leave some kind of a legacy that way, right? Otherwise it's like, you can't take that money with you,
Tell us more about bootstrapping. Just lean into that word for me.
My favorite. That's my favorite. I, having come from all my early experience was huge companies, Citibank, HSBC, Axiom. I was building the very first databases when I was a mainframe programmer, like Columbia House, BMG, New York Times. We would take thousands of tapes that would come from mom and pop shops and we would build these databases. And so, essentially we were bootstrapping databases, right? Before anybody knew what a database was. So I would, log the tape in, normalize, standardize, merge, purge, all this stuff to create these databases. And we would hand them over to like a New York Times and they would say, here's $10 million for this database, right? And Axiom or Experian at the time when I worked there, they would walk away counting their money. But that's where I learned, like, there's a lot of little nitty-gritty hard work that has to be done in a very cheap and cost-effective way to be able to get to these big dollars. And so coming from those big companies, like then I went on to HSBC and Citibank where we were doing early statistical analysis models on credit to figure out, which people deserve credit, which people would charge off early, and then which people needed to go to external collections versus internal collections. So I got a lot of little nuts and bolts of all the business. Then going into consulting, I could see everything, right? Consulting and program management, you see every part of the business. You meet every person. You see all their challenges and all the things that really will tank their department if they're not done right. So all those little views that I had helped me realize when I went into security that the stuff we're doing isn't really that difficult. We have technologists who are really good at the nuts and bolts of things, but the business does not connect with cybersecurity well. And therefore we don't get the money that we need to have, right? So it's a constant fight to get money. But if we can speak the language of the business and the business problem, then we can either get money or we can horse trade to get what we need. And so most of the time I end up horse trading as much as possible to get the things that I need. And that's, if I'm working in a company like maybe a Series B or Series C startup, we don't have much money, right? You might be lucky to get $50,000 for your security tools. And now, even more now, it's easy to get the things that you want because it's getting so much cheaper. But we're trained to go with like the Gartner quadrant, right? All the expensive tools, right? Nobody's good if you're not on the Gartner quadrant, right? But it's all BS because people pay to be there. So it's like, why are we buying into this load of crap? There are great tools out there, right? Other Series A, Series B, Series C products that haven't blown up and they're amazing, right? So all we have to do is just look for them.
I actually had a person that I interviewed recently for a GRC job tell me he uses the Magic Quadrant as like an engineering tool. I was like, oh, you're suggesting things to me that you may not even, you're exposing that you neither understand the Gartner Magic Quadrant and you don't understand engineering.
Yeah.
Talk to us about bootstrapping with regard to delivering a CISO or CIO fractional service.
Yeah, so let's just say I am lucky enough to have come into a place who is looking for me to build security for them, which is my favorite, right? Especially if you don't already have a previous attempt that you have to clean up. But even if you do, I'll do a quick assessment, right? Asking a few questions of people. I'll use the NIST CSF framework. I used to use the really hard CSET stuff, which would take so much time. And now we have this Expel document that we got from Carnegie Mellon, which makes it so much easier. I don't know if you've used it yet or not, but it basically boils that whole thing down and makes it really easy for you to sit down with like an analyst or an IT person and say, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you do this? Right? Takes maybe a couple sessions of a couple hours. And then you can formulate a picture of like, okay, here's the things that we need to do top to bottom, most important to least important. And then you can assign some thoughts to it, right? Like, okay, we don't have any scanning whatsoever, zero vulnerability management, or we have zero patching, or, whatever it is. Then you start to figure out, okay, they probably can't afford too much here. So I'm going to go for the most cost-effective solution I can for each one of these things. And I just come with that, right? Like, you have both Macs and you have IBM laptops or whatever it is. We're going to do Adigy and Manage Engine. Here's what I recommend. Here's their price point. Here's what they do. They check all the boxes, right? That's all they want to hear. And when you come with I have a lot of vendors that I love doing business with. They're reliable. They've never let me down. And I like to come with a package that's fairly preset, but I have lots of options so I can tweak, right? So if they're like, oh no, we already did business with Jamf. We don't like them. Okay, cool. Here's another one over here. Or I've come into places and they're paying $75,000 for an auditor. And I'm like, let's have a heart attack together because you could pay 10.
Yes.
Like, here's an auditor right here that's ready to go that will deliver your SOC report in 3 months and they will do it for 10. And they're amazing to work with, right? They write a brilliant report and they'll even correlate with other audit frameworks. So you don't have to pay another auditor to do that, right? They'll say this correlates to HIPAA. This correlates to iTrust. So the bootstrapping thing, I think, is having your arsenal ready and knowing, and constantly, I constantly interview, which I'm probably a dream for the people who are out there selling on LinkedIn, because I will actually take their calls because I want to see, what do you have? Like,
Right.
Demo.
Right.
And I'll use wherever I'm currently at, if they'll let me, like, for instance, like at Spekit, one of my favorite things to do because I have a great boss is to do proof of concept on stuff and see whether it works or not, because we have a very, very tight network. We have a great infrastructure team and we're pretty lean and we run efficiently. So we can afford to spend a little time to run tests on things. So I'll test it out, see what I think. And if it works, then we'll implement it. And you're usually dealing with a small company that will give you a good price. And then, on the side, essentially, I'm talking to other companies about, hey, I've used this product before, or I've used this auditor before. They're great. I highly recommend it. And they'll usually just go with it, right? So it's really easy to say, we're going to build this thing from scratch. We're going to do it for less than $100,000. And that's going to include your SOC audit, your auditor. They basically see it as like, hey, I don't have to worry about this stuff, right? I don't have to go through this huge procurement process to compare all these vendors. And if they want to, then we do that, right? Here's three quotes. And I think having the relationships with a lot of those vendors also helps, because you can speed through some of the BS of like, oh, let's have a meeting to talk about what you want. And let's have another meeting to talk about what you might want in the future, right? Like, we just cut through all that crap. We don't need to talk to 3 account managers and, 2 implementation specialists. I already know how to do it. And I think that's kind of some of the value add too, is like, hey, we're not going to do this because even though everybody says to do this, because it's not going to work here. Just having seen things and done things the wrong way a couple times will help you do a better job with the bootstrap. And I think some places are kind of scared, right? Like, I don't want to trust your judgment on all this. And I'm like, well, then why am I here? Right? Why did you bring me here? And sometimes they'll just shop a solution with another solution to see what you can do. But, I win all the time on saving money. And so that's where I like to stay focused on, how do you talk the love language of the business? And it is saving money.
Yes.
Sometimes it's saving time, but most of the time when you talk about, hey, I can cut your cost here, I can cut your cost here, they're like very much disbelief, or they'll be like, the quality can't be the same. And I'm like, I assure you, that an auditor is an auditor. You do not need a giant name. The only thing that's complicated is when you get into mergers and acquisitions, you're not going to cheap out on your auditor because you need to be able to show that they were legit. But, you're not going to use some automated AI auditor. You're going to use, somebody who is a chartered accountant. That's all you need, right? So I think a lot of people just are misled that money equals quality. And the more you spend, the more quality you're going to get. And it's not necessarily true in the IT industry, right? A lot of stuff has just become so like repetitive that the cost has come down and people just haven't realized it because they were happy with their vendor and they kept it and they didn't realize they're overpaying all this time. Where if I'm somewhere consistently every year, every single vendor gets a run for their money, and we'll go check and see who else is in the market, what else is out here. Like I just had a favorite software scanning vendor basically fall down, and they fell down so hard that I basically ripped and replaced them out of all of my clients because I'm like, this is embarrassing. I brought them here, right? And I told everybody, hey, I'm sorry that we're doing this 1 year after we brought them in and we just got them implemented, but they're going IPO and they don't really care anymore. So we're going to go back to somebody who's hungry and wants to earn our money. And, it landed pretty well, I felt, for the amount of work that we needed to do to reset them up. But sometimes you have to do that because I'm not going to put my reputation out there as like, hey, I brought these guys here and then they're not going to do a good job. So it's all about speaking the love language and bringing quality, right? Bring quality consistently and be known for quality and be okay with calling yourself out on something that didn't work. Like that, just owning up to something not working, I think is a big deal because a lot of places won't do that. They'll just be like, oh, well, that's the vendor. Can't control it. Is it in the contract? A lot of people like try to fall back on the contract. And I'm like,
I'm listening to your stories and how you explain what T&T Consulting does. It sounds absolutely like you are full scope consulting. You step in, you check the business alignment, you double check and see if there's other things that need to be accomplished that they didn't initially ask you for. You are ready to go with support and team members. You also have a completely built-in value-added reseller function where you've got identified vendors and services and solutions. You mentioned earlier not having a menu, but once you dive down a level, you absolutely do. And you also are bringing the cybersecurity with attitude to all of this, and you're a red tape smasher.
It's kind of fun.
Okay.
I know, that's the nerdy part of me, right? Like my husband always jokes from the other room. He goes, you got a problem? Yo, I'll solve it. And I'm like, okay, vanilla. But really, that's the value add, right? Anybody can go and say, hey, I can give you services. I can give you, I can bring you a person and lend you a person to do these things. But in the end, you want someone who can communicate. You want someone, and that's what I took away from DeVry, right? They hammer communication, business value, just very deep-seated things. Even when I was in programming, they would be like, you don't program what you want. You program what they tell you, right? Where's your requirements? You don't program without requirements. And the same thing goes for the business, right? If we don't understand what they need and we don't ask the right questions or the question behind the question, you're delivering something and they're not happy with it, right? Which is not good for business. It's not going to bring you back again. So I just try to keep that in mind, right? Like help them do the best job they can and make sure they have enough information. Because there's just a general lack of information about everything. And people are afraid to look stupid. So they don't want to ask you a dumb question. They'd rather you voluntarily help them through that process so they don't have to look like they're stupid. And that's the thing I remember in my head, right? The smarter they are, the more they will not want to look stupid. So they will not ask a bunch of questions. And the more quiet they are, the more there's questions. So you have to try to get to it really quickly.
I would like to invite your feedback here. In the near future, I'm going to do an episode about, maybe the first 35 questions you need to ask if you are a CISO reporting in day one and you're now standing in front of your supervisor. That might be the CEO, that might be a CIO or CTO. What are the first questions you need to ask? I'd like to offer the first three, what I think to be the first three questions, and then I'm going to ask you if you agree or if you've got a better set. So for me, the first question is, Is there a security incident happening right now where you need me to focus on that, drop everything else that I'm doing for today, go work on this security incident? The second question is there a client-facing engagement or requirement that needs my attention right now, today? And 3, is there a cost factor that I need to be aware of? Is there something that needs to get resolved, CapEx, OpEx, you name it, right now, today? And I think that by asking those questions with that comma, today, right now, helps the CTO or CEO that you're talking to understand how you're prioritizing those 3 questions. You're talking about imminent, immediate, right now, today impact. And you've set them up for security ops first, business development second, and then cost factors third. And that's a kind of priority set you're going to repeat a week later, 3 months later, et cetera. So your first 3 questions, you're in the door, you're figuring out exactly what needs your attention. And I'm not talking about a 90-day plan here. I'm talking about, is there some sort of emergency in these first 3 issues that need you right now? I got 5 more questions you got to ask so you understand how to be a CISO in that environment. But those are the first 3. Do you have insights or feedback on those first 3?
I like those 3. I don't know if they'd be my first ones because usually I don't get called to too many crisis things. And I think that's just the nature of like the flavor of my business is not crisis management. I get a lot of calls about like, hey, what do you recommend? Which I think is, basically dropping the breadcrumbs for people to come back to me. But typically what I start with is a nice eyeball to eyeball. And I say, what keeps you up at night? Because there are underlying issues that people want to talk about, but no one ever asked the question and they don't want to look needy or greedy in the environment, but usually whoever you're talking to is worried about something and that's why they're going to bat for money or this person or whatever it is, right? So I want to know that. And I do ask that of everybody that I meet when I go there, right? Because I want to know from their perspective and their unique perspective what it is that's giving them pause. And you'd be surprised what comes out of that, right? Especially when they know that someone's paying attention and writing something down and going to do something about it. Because typically what I find is the behavior pattern is people will raise things, nothing happens, and they stop raising it. And it gets buried and it becomes a festering wound. And it basically is the root of other problems, but nobody ever goes back to it. So they just see broken, and they think it's a person, or they think it's, I hate that tool they brought, right? Because they think that it's like the face of it. So that's usually my number one right after the niceties is like, let's get down to, what's giving you pause. My next one is, who is your trusted person? The person that you go to always when there is something going on, like that knows where the bodies are buried and can give me the most accurate information. Because I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking to the big boss because they don't know anything. And I don't tell them that, but I'm like, hey, I want to get straight to the nuts and bolts of whatever's going on here. Because usually what will happen is when you talk to that person, the project morphs and you'll either get to the real root or you'll get to more opportunities for money.
You're going to get to your 5 whys.
So then you can go back to the guy and say, hey, are you aware? I spoke with your trusted person, right? Which automatically adds credibility to the conversation that you're bringing. And by that time, I've already come with, here's what I think is happening here that you may also want to look at in the future, right? You're not saying, hey, I'm not saying give this to me. I'm saying, I just want to make sure that you are aware of these things that I have noted while I've been here that are a concern. And here's why, right? Here's the downstream impact, I think, of this that you may be seeing or that I'm hearing you're seeing. So you're doing a little bit of free consulting for them, but it's dropping the breadcrumbs. And then in their mind, they're not like, oh, she's money grubbing or she's trying to get after as much as she can. It's like, oh, I didn't know about that. Like, oh, I should be concerned about this. Like, how come no one's raised this to me? And usually in reality, someone raised it. It got swept under the carpet, or they raised it. And that person, unfortunately, thought it was handled and it just wasn't handled to fruition, right? Like it didn't get solved. It got a Band-Aid or it got put in with some other project. And then that actually didn't realize any benefits. So those 2 things. And then I think, Then I would get into probably some of the things that you're mentioning here, like, what's on fire right now? What do we need to attack? And the other thing is parallel paths, right? They love to hear parallel paths. So we don't have to have only just one number one, right? We can be iterative, we can be agile, like bringing some of those tenets of software development into a project situation or just into the stuff that comes to your plate, right? Like, I can attack all these things in a couple minute increments, but are we really making progress? Or do we need to make a project out of this, a project out of this, an operational process out of this, right? Like helping them separate things that we already know, but we take for granted that they understand. Because I think it's an educational opportunity again, right? Like everybody's business talk is different. And if we break it down to very, very low level, like, hey, what can an 8th grader understand? Like, let's not talk down to them, but bring it down to a level where just a baseline manager is going to be able to understand what I'm talking about. Because again, they don't want to look stupid. And if we use words they don't understand, they're going to just look like they get it. And they're just going to go on with whatever they're talking about. But there's missed opportunities there for solving, missed opportunities for finding problems, and missed opportunities for building consensus amongst the team, which gets in the way of work. Like it could be getting in the way of work for you as the purveyor of the services, and it could be getting in the way of their own internal ability to like participate fully in a project. So anyway, I get into a lot of like the headspace around communication because as a project manager, I always would see this stuff, even between like a program manager and a project manager. The program manager is looking at the projects and looking at how they go together, but the project manager is only concerned about their thing right here and how they're going to get theirs done. And the same thing goes for the stakeholders of all those projects. They only care about right here, right now, and they're not looking across at the other things that are going to get in the way of like actually letting their thing get done. And so I think that's been like where I have a little bit of difference for other people. And some people like that style, some people don't. Some people are like, I don't like her. I'm going to go with this dude who's straight to the point and is going to check these boxes and do exactly what I said and not ask me questions. And then that's where I just have to kind of feel it out, right? Is this a no questions type person and they just want you to be an order taker and they want you to go away and do it? Cool. We can do that too.
Cass Mack Tobin, thank you for being a special guest here on the Cybersecurity Council. We always want to support you. You are one of our great cyber leaders. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think it's worth noting that my husband always is my technical resource. And so I always have to thank him both in person and anywhere that someone gives me a little oxygen for it. But Sean Tobin is literally the guy who knows everything about technology. It doesn't matter what it is. He will either figure it out or he will solve it. And he's self-taught, like never went to college. So sometimes I'm like, how does he even like me, right? I'm so stupid. But in reality, I think he recognizes that I have a little bit of something that is similar to him. And so we get along, but not to belabor at that point, but I just adore him and he's something special. So hopefully he likes me for a while longer. And then there's my two magic students turned, I would say partners, like they're really my partners in crime. Anything we need to attack, they're there. Audrey Lajmi and Angelia Gallegos Loveland, they're just like mind-blowingly smart, motivated, just treasures, I think. And I'm just so appreciative for them.
Thank you, Cass. I want good things for you. Have a really good day.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Council. This council strives to showcase unique cybersecurity leadership stories. Its mission is to demystify and simplify cybersecurity across the entire business landscape. Best practices, lessons learned, operational recommendations, it's all here. Brought to you by the Cybersecurity Council, LLC, Brian Green and myself, Scott Brammer, will be your hosts. We have come in from the cyber wilderness, not just to share what we have learned, but to find and elevate some of the most important voices in cyber. Brian is a former Division I college football player who has experience across many cybersecurity software startups. He has a successful exit on his resume too. He's also the founder and president of this very community, the Cybersecurity Council. Myself, Scott Brammer, I'm a former Marine and active CISO, and I have 3 patents in cyber and risk. As hosts, we are here to elevate best practices, and strengthen the cyber community, both for the community itself and its allies. The Cybersecurity Council has had auspicious beginnings here in the Austin, Texas community, but we are already going worldwide. Everyone should be a cyber practitioner. The views expressed on this podcast, either by us or by our guests, are our own, and they do not necessarily reflect the view of our organizations. This podcast is intended as a forum for professional knowledge, but it is not legal or regulatory advice. Always consult your legal professionals for legal and regulatory matters. And now,
assemble the council.